Hello, my name's Alan Wenham. I'm talking to you on behalf of the Eastbourne Society, and I'm going to mention a few people who have been really quite instrumental in terms of developing Eastbourne and looking first of all at what I call bricks and mortar. I have to start with the seventh Duke of Devonshire. For those who live locally, they're probably sort of quite tired of hearing about the Dukes of Devonshire and the control that they had over the town. And sometimes I think there's a danger of them being underestimated or perhaps taken for granted. The seventh Duke held the ducality for a total of 32 years, and it was a pivotal time in the development of Eastbourne as a seaside resort. And I'm sure many will be familiar with Chatsworth, the ducal seat. And of course in Eastbourne there was Compton Place that was used as an occasional summer home. The Duke was not a regular visitor. He came to Eastbourne roughly every 18 months or so. So what about the man himself, William Cavendish? He and his family owned a total of 200,000 acres of land. And you can see there of which 11,000 was in Sussex and only 2,500 in Eastbourne. So in terms of the total land holdings and the general sort of investment interest of the Chatsworth estate, Eastbourne was small beer in a sense. He was the Lord Lieutenant of Lancashire. He was the Chancellor of both Cambridge and London University at the same time. He was no fool. He won the Smith Prize for mathematics, a very prestigious award. And in terms of the overall pecking order, he was really sort of number one in the aristocratic league, just sort of one below the royal family. And he used that prestige and that status to really quite good effect. And he was instrumental in bankrolling initially a lot of the early development of Eastbourne. You have your back to the sea here, and you're looking down the upper part of what's called Terminus Road. And he brought about really by lending to builders the development of one of the early terraces in Eastbourne. And he was also instrumental in building what we now call the Burlington Hotel. And of course Cavendish Place. And this was really sort of quite typical of the sort of standard of development that he wanted for this new resort of Eastbourne. And here's a picture of Devonshire Park in the very early days, and quite deliberately called Devonshire Park and using his name because he knew that the sort of people or the class of people that he would want to attract here would be only too aware of the status of the Duke of Devonshire. At the time, of course, this would be sort of probably in the 1890s this picture was taken. It was a private club and not a public park at all. Wonderful building, the Winter Garden complex. Again, sort of deliberately aimed at the upper classes and trying to furnish them with the best quality arts and culture and leisure and sporting activities. And he also invested considerably in the promenades of Eastbourne. This is a picture we might be familiar with of the upper parades going up towards Holywell, but this started out as a cliff about half a mile long that was actually converted into the walkways that we see today. And here's a picture. This will be the early 1900s, where really his investment and his focus on quality really paid off, because by this time Eastbourne really was attracting the sort of clientele that it had always aimed for. And certainly at this time, gentlemen, particularly on a Sunday, when walking along the upper promenade, would be expected to wear morning suits. So a great deal was achieved by him, but you never do these things alone. And George Ambrose Wallace is very instrumental in achieving the 7th Duke's aims. He was recruited in the year that the 7th Duke took over in 1859, and he was only 19 years old at the time. He'd previously worked as a, quote, water engineer in the east of England, and he was immediately recruited as the local steward for the Duke's land holdings in Eastbourne, and he ended up playing a major role in the development of the town, wearing a number of hats. And the epithet Eastbourne's Mr. Fix-It is certainly not misplaced. Here's a picture of the offices that Wallace occupied. This is in what was called Seaside Road at the time, now Trinity Trees, and opposite Trinity Church. And these offices accommodated a number of interests that all ran in parallel. He was the borough surveyor of Eastbourne. He held a seat on the local board and then later on the council, so he had sort of political interests as well. He was the CEO of the Eastbourne Water Company and the Devonshire Baths Company. And he also had a little sideline as a building contractor together with his brother, and the company was called Wallace and Wallace. And things were so mixed up and so interchangeable that they seemed to use the same notepaper for absolutely everything. It's something today that we'd be absolutely horrified with, this sort of lack of Chinese walls and the conflicts of interest. So among his many projects, he oversaw the total development of the Devonshire Park project, the Devonshire Baths that were situated at the top part of Carlisle Road, near to the sea. And being a water engineer, I think he was quite pleased in achieving at the time the largest saltwater baths in the country. And these baths were actually fed by the tide, so they could change the water by letting in the sea from time to time. Now, I talked about the major change to the upper promenades, the King Edward's Parade, and this is work going on that, again, Wallace personally supervised for about 4 years, transforming the cliffs into the walkways that we know today, and built the sea wall in the area. We'll talk about sea walls a little bit later. And with all the excess spoil that came out of this contract, and it's nearly 500,000 cubic yards of chalk, he actually built this roadway, which still exists today, of course. This is Upper Duke's Drive, leading on those series of hairpin bends up to the Bullock Down and towards Beachy Head. And it's covered in trees today, of course, and we don't realise what an engineering feat it was. And wearing his water company hat, he supervised the building of Eastbourne's sewage scheme. This is the second large sewer to be built in Eastbourne. First was in the 1860s, this is in the mid-1880s. And as you can see, you're standing outside of W.H. Smith's looking towards the station. And if you thought that the recent work on pedestrianisation in Eastbourne caused disruption, this is what disruption really looks like. And then, of course, the sewage scheme ended up at Langley Point. And here's the proud opening of the first scheme by the Duke of Devonshire. And Wallace is standing just 2 people to the left of the Duke. There's the chap in the Duke is the chap in the light-coloured trousers. Now, I mentioned sea walls a little bit earlier. Wallace was responsible for building the seawall from the pier down to the redoubt. Today we can walk along the prom, not really realising what we're walking along, but it is in fact a seawall that runs 18 feet deep all the way to the redoubt. And here's a very early picture of things just being put in place, preparing for the overall development of Royal Parade and all the land behind it. And he was also active in the Meads area. This is the lovely Meads Village development that was opened really just a year before Wallace died. And he built this, and some people actually called it for a time the Wallace Village. He was also responsible for building the Queen's Hotel. And here's an early picture. This must be before the year 1900, because you'll note that there's no roadway through between the western part of the parades and the eastern part. And he actually built this in 13 months flat, which I think is an incredible achievement. And the building just to the left of it, you can see here, is the colonnade building. He also constructed, and also the Queen's Gardens, which is nearby. So really quite responsible for substantial parts of the better quality building of the town. And we mustn't forget the Devonshire Park Theatre that Wallace and Wallace also constructed, and the lovely, now redundant of course, Bedford Well pumping station. Now here's a lovely picture of the inside of the pumping station, which would take water from the Bedford Well before the water became too brackish, and pump it up to the Paradise Woods Reservoir. Also responsible for the general layout of what we now call the Lower Meads area, called the College area in its time. He developed about 70 high-end residential properties, and this is one he occupied himself in South Street, Bellevue, and the St Saviour's Church is just off to the right of the picture. He then sort of went up market and built himself Holywell Mount, later to become Ravenscroft School, a 40-room mansion this was, with hot and cold water on every floor, and on the upper floor there was a reception area that could accommodate 100 people for special parties and things. And then in his later years he built and occupied Fairfield Court at the junction of Carlisle Road and Meads Road. As I said, he was the first mayor of Eastbourne in 1883, and subsequently became a very influential alderman, and being the Duke's steward and running a major business in the town, really had quite a heavy sway over local affairs. It's true to say that he did get a great deal done. He really was Eastbourne's Mr. Fix-It, and if you like, he was almost a new town's development corporation, sort of operating as virtually a one-man band. He was very clever at using the Duke's money. He and the Duke didn't meet that often in terms of their whole partnership. They only met a couple of dozen times. So Wallace had sort of quite free rein, and I think it's fair to say that Eastbourne gained a lot out of it, because I think the Duke sort of ended up paying for a lot more than he should have done in lieu of the council itself spending out. In fact, just before his death, he started to be investigated by Price Waterhouse, the accountants, not for anything unlawful, I don't think, but for certainly sort of dubious practice in the way that certain accounts were handled. So he sort of died, if you like, at a fairly convenient time. On his death and at his funeral, the funeral cortege had 56 carriages carrying the great and the good of Eastbourne, and that gives you some idea of the standing with which he was held. So, George Wallace, Eastbourne's Mr. Fix-It. But again, Mr. Fix-It can't do it all alone. Welcome Henry Currey, Old Etonian and son of the Duke of Devonshire's principal solicitor. He worked with Burton and Paxton, Decimus Burton and Joseph Paxton. Paxton, of course, of Crystal Palace fame. Look at what he did before he arrived in Eastbourne. Designed St Thomas's and the P&O shipping headquarters in London. And actually joined as really sort of a top class complement to people like Wallace the builder. He designed the Winter Gardens, and you can see the Paxton influence there. Ditto, he designed the Devonshire Park Theatre. He also designed the first part of the Eastbourne College, again a major initiative by the Duke, and designed the Queen's Hotel. And you're starting to see a pattern here where Currey is designing it and Wallace are building it. And the same thing happens now with the Bedford Well pumping station. And again, he worked very closely with Wallace on the design of the Meads area. This is a photo taken in the late 60s. That little triangle of land on the left-hand side of the picture is Devonshire Park, not yet developed. And what a wonderful empty canvas to start working with. And of course it ended up as a very prestigious part of the town, the Lower Meads part of the town, with its wide streets and lovely, really quite expensive villas. We're going to talk now about Mark Martin, a local chap who was again responsible for a particular quality of building, but was perhaps a bit lower profile. He was very much Hampton Park based. He ended up living in Hampton Park in Bran Road. In fact, he built most of the houses in Bran Road. And this is the workforce at the Hampton Park Brickworks and Kiln, which he owned. So he made a lot of his own bricks, and he used some of them here. He was mayor of Eastbourne in 1908-1909, and a couple of years later Hampton Park was incorporated into the borough of Eastbourne. And perhaps to celebrate it, Mark Martin actually had this community hall built in Broderick Road and dedicated it free of charge to the emerging village of Hampton Park. And somebody once commented very sourly, oh, he was just trying to use up his old bricks or something, which I think is a very unfair comment, because it was really a very generous donation. This is Glynde Avenue in Hampton Park, and this opened round about 1909, again built by Mark Martin. And Mark Martin became a great advocate of the Garden City movement, and a follower of people like Ebenezer Howard, who was saying, we'll solve the problem of the Victorian slums by giving people fresh air and large houses and gardens and all the rest of it. And he was very keen that Hampton Park should become an actual garden city example. Unfortunately, it never went any further than Glynde Avenue, I think possibly because the First World War came along and put an end to things. One of his most prestigious achievements was the rebuilding of Ratton Manor, a very fine arts and crafts building. And equally fine is the Who at Willingdon, designed by Lutyens, of course. And so he could certainly push out the quality when he wanted to. And you might be familiar with this row of shops in Terminus Road, where Poundland and other lovely stores are situated. Again, he built this round about 1901. And at the same time, he built Our Lady of Ransom Church. So in all sorts of ways, he had made his impact on the town. He died in 1925, and his son took over the business. And there's a little advert here showing that the company is just going to start work on St Elizabeth's Church in Victoria Drive. And of course, we know what's happening to that at the moment. And then finally, I just want to talk about James Peerless. Born in Jevington, one of 7 children and the son of a wheelwright. And Peerless actually started off in Eastbourne working with his brother and registered as a wheelwright, but also an innkeeper. And the inn in question is the building that we now know as Bill's, opposite Debenham, which started off life as the Carpenter's Arms. And in fact, Peerless started his company really from that spot and had a substantial building and timbers yard just behind. And here's a picture. You have your back to Debenhams and you're looking down Langley Road. And where you can see the trees on the right-hand side is where the Curzon Cinema is now. But prior to that, this was the yard that he first occupied. And unfortunately, it came to a sticky end a couple of years after he died. It was quite a dramatic picture of the yard being destroyed by fire. He also had his own brickworks, and here's a map of the what I call the large Tesco roundabout area. The seaside itself runs across the bottom right diagonally of the picture, and those blue areas are really the result of clay extraction for his brickworks, and there was a kiln on site as well, and that's where the large Tesco store is now situated. Again, responsible for some interesting stuff. This is Chatsworth Gardens. There's Lansdowne Terrace just by the Wish Tower. He was also responsible for building Christ Church and the beautiful St Saviour's Church, so he could really achieve some quality. And there's a picture of the interior. And he also built this very, very unusual building, Romano-Byzantine style, I suppose, in very difficult circumstances on what was called the Marsh in Eastbourne. And if you ever get a chance to see the inside, it really is quite fine. He also built and lived in one of them, those fine villas along what we now call Trinity Trees. So he sort of did quite well for himself overall. And perhaps his greatest achievement was Eastbourne Town Hall. And here you see Peerless, the little chap holding the hat on the left of the picture. And he wasn't the first choice to build a town hall, but the first choice couldn't get a bond. So Peerless was asked to take up the initiative, which he did, and actually did it for a fixed price contract and managed to build this in just over, it was about 2.5 years. It was a building that cost £35,000 plus £10,000 for fitting out, and as I say, it was a fixed price contract. But he lost money on it, but I don't think it worried him sort of too much, because some years later, when he died, a certain land agent called Towner disposed of 60 properties that belonged to him in the town, which netted about £40 million in today's value. So as the son of a wheelwright from Jevington, he didn't do too badly, and at the same time, like many others I've just mentioned, had a real impact on the town that we can still see today. And that's it. Thank you very much.